You ready?
Yep.
LP good? All right, let's get started. Good evening, folks, and welcome to Jumpstarting Downtown Louisville. This is certainly one of the most important conversations we've had in our Bridging the Divide series. My name is Andy Trinan. I'm the president and CEO here at the Fraser History Museum, alongside my good friend and our director of community engagement, Rachel Platt.
This feels familiar.
Yeah.
Like
We actually were sitting on different sides, and I told the
Back
press
in
we
the
had to
TV
switch because
business.
when we worked at HAS, I sat on this side. So
Absolutely. Well, downtowns usually, as you know, represent the heart and soul of a community. They're also a huge indicator of larger things as well, social and economic trends. So goes downtown. Usually, so goes the entire community. And that's why everybody is paying attention to what is happening in downtown Louisville and what needs to be done to jumpstart it. We have a great panel with us. We're going to introduce them in just a moment.
But first, we want to take a look at the overall problem. From the pandemic to protests for racial justice on the heels of the killing of Breonna Taylor, it's been described as a double gut punch for downtown Louisville. As we emerge from the pandemic and vaccinations continue to roll out, the question is, how do we help our economy rebound?
That's right. What about tourism? What about downtown businesses? Are residents ready to return? And do we have a perception issue? One thing we're going to tackle tonight, you see the chief of police is joining us. Crime is certainly not helping things. We're going to talk about that. We have so much to cover. But before we begin, we want to share the results of a recent survey that we did with our virtual Fraser magazine. So this was the question we asked. How comfortable are you coming back to downtown Louisville? We're going to show you the results. Again, this was from our survey with people who get our newsletter, about 39,000 people. 42.5% said they're very comfortable coming back down. 34.9% said moderately comfortable. 16.7% said not comfortable. And 5.9% said, I will not come downtown.
Now that's 77% who said they're either very comfortable or moderately comfortable. But again, those are Fraser History Museum members largely and people who subscribe to our newsletter. So let's check in with our audience tonight. How comfortable are you coming to downtown Louisville? We want to ask that very same question. We want you to weigh in and we will give you those results immediately. How comfortable are you coming downtown? Are you A, very comfortable? Are you B, moderately comfortable? Are you C, not comfortable? Or D, I will not come downtown? And you could just answer right there live. Rachel, it'll be interesting to see because our audience was pretty positive and receptive to the idea of coming back downtown. There were some posts about the same topic on Facebook. As you know, social media can be a nasty place. We didn't get the same exact results on Facebook. So it'll be interesting to see the people who signed up for this program, where their comfort level is.
All right. And then we want our panelists to take a look at this because we're going to ask you questions about this poll. We'll go ahead and see if we can get the results. How comfortable are you coming back downtown? 71% say very comfortable. 23% say moderately comfortable. 5% say not comfortable. And 0% are saying we won't come back downtown. So I'd say this is a very optimistic crowd as well. So we're going to talk about that in just a minute.
Yeah, interesting. And you know, if you're inclined to sign up for this kind of program, you obviously have some interest in downtown and downtown resurgence. So we appreciate you all being there. Now to our panel who will be fielding our questions tonight, as well as your questions. Please make sure to post them in the chat or Q&A section if you're watching on Zoom. In the comments section if you're watching on Facebook. As we introduce each panelist, we want you to respond to those results that we showed you and just a brief assessment of where you think we are in jumpstarting downtown Louisville and what that recovery time may be. We start with Metro Councilperson Ja'Cory Arthur from District 4, which covers a good portion of downtown. Ja'Cory, congratulations, you're first up.
Peace. If you don't know, if you haven't been a part of it, I am helping lead some of the diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts for the downtown revitalization team. And I'm a strong believer that if the downtown is for everyone, it should be for anyone. And that means that the downtown is reflective of our racial demographics. It is reflective of our gender demographics. It is reflective of our socioeconomic across the entire city. And that has been something that I've been working on throughout my career, even before coming here to the Louisville Metro Council. So as far as bringing downtown back, I have been saying it over and over and over. We don't need to be thinking about getting back to normal. We need to be thinking about getting back or really getting to a new normal. And I strongly believe that is the only way for downtown to come back.
Corey, were you surprised by any of those results that you just saw? Ours said like 5% won't come back downtown at all from when we did it for the virtual Fraser. 0% said they won't come back downtown as far as our audience members. Did anything about those poll results surprise you in any way?
No, not necessarily. It's important to understand who is taking those tests, who's taking those assessments, because sometimes those numbers can be skewed. But I guarantee if you open those numbers up and made it accessible for the people who live where I live in the west end of Louisville, it might look a lot differently. As I talked about downtown being for everyone, but not anyone, you have to really ask yourself, what is downtown for me? If you don't work down here, or if you don't feel like you can access the eateries down here, you might answer that survey completely differently. So I'm not surprised by the results according to what I know about some of your stakeholders, but I would be interested to see what those results look like if you were focusing on people who live right next to downtown.
All right, more to come from you on that and how we make downtown more attractive and inviting to everybody. Our next panel is Cleo Battle, the Chief Operating Officer at Louisville Tourism. We want you to respond to the results and then a short assessment of where you think we are in coming back, Cleo.
Sure. Rachel, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here. And welcome to the audience out there. As Councilman Arthur said, I'm sure there is some hesitancy for some folks considering coming downtown. I know Louisville Tourism and our industry, we want to be at the forefront of welcoming folks to downtown, and I agree. I don't think it should be trying to get back to what downtown was, but a new normal for us in this community. I think Andy mentioned earlier that last year dealt us a double punch with the dual pandemics, the global virus, and confronting racism here in our city. I think we've made great strides as it relates to the pandemic. Since the vaccines were available. And at the same time, I've also seen efforts in our industry and in some of the industries here in the community to be change agents to improve the effects of racism on the city. But I do, and to that end, for our city to heal and prosper, we must embrace diversity, equity, and inclusion. We must work together in building a strong economy that is truly prosperous for us all. And specifically for our industry, we need a strong downtown presence. You know, during our peak for visitation, we supported 60,000 jobs in the metro area. Many of them are in the downtown corridor because that's where our core of our industry relies, with attractions, hotels, venues, and restaurants. So, you know, we are focused on getting these vital tourism-related jobs back. So all the efforts, this conversation tonight, as it relates to downtown, is critically important to our sector.
Thanks, Cleo. There is a resurgence, a little bit of a resurgence in tourism. We've noticed it here at the Fraser. In fact, in April, we had our best month since pre-pandemic, and those months have been better each since. April was actually better than 4 months in 2019. So there is interest, I think, in regional tourism. People have a hunger to get back out there. People want to travel. People want to be with their families, and they want to go to places that are cool. And downtown Louisville is one of those cool places. Rebecca Fleischecker is the director of the Department of Economic Development and Louisville Forward. Rebecca, your reaction and where we are, and really how much money and resources the city is going to have to sink into this thing to get businesses in the other sectors back.
Well, sure. Let me turn that around a little bit. The pictures that you showed from last summer are a completely different world than we are right now. And everything, as we look backward, we have that advantage is different. And it's been, I would say, changing month by month. And the biggest change that I have seen is the conversations we're having that are more comfortable and easier to have around racial injustice and systemic racism that we would not have had as easily a year ago. The boards, for the most part, not all the way, are down off the buildings. And I think that was a big thing that we went through in the very beginning of the year. And we are seeing a lot more people on the street. So it's not, when you say the city putting money into this thing, I think that there are some bold and audacious ideas coming out of the downtown revitalization team, which I'm really excited about. We're hoping that some of the federal stimulus funds can go towards some of those. And I think the biggest thing that we'll be addressing in downtown is our houseless population, that I think we can, there's no one easy fix to it, but there are some things that we can do that will, I think, make a big difference. But we're already seeing a lot of differences. It's multifaceted and complex. And with people coming back, with people being able to be together again, to Cleo's point, we've got visitors and conferences. There will be a lot more employees on the street in downtown, already are in the past week. It's just continuing to be a different and better place. To Councilman Arthur's point, this will be better than we were.
I was going to say a lot of build back better. People want to reimagine. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. Chief Erica Shields with the Louisville Metro Police Department. Your thoughts on how the pandemic and protests, along with systemic racism, have impacted everything in crime, really, through 2020 and through right now. Kind of your assessment of us coming back and perceptions of crime, and do you think that's weighing in on some of the issues of people not wanting to come back downtown?
Good evening. Thank you for having me. I think it's interesting to hear the different responses from the fellow panelists. My window here obviously is pretty short, 5 months. And what I can say in this time is that in the last couple of months, I can feel a real energy in the downtown space that I had not felt. And that's a positive for us in LMPD, because what I'll say is when everything is shuttered, it's devastating economically, but also lends itself to criminal activity, because it just becomes, you need people, you need energy, and you need opportunity, which I think goes to what your question is. And that is, with the COVID coming in and everything shutting down, what you saw is those individuals who are already marginalized and on the edges were further thrust aside. And the opportunities for employment, the opportunities for activities for children, they went away. And certainly that's been a contributor to what we're seeing in the criminal activity. It's just the lack of opportunity, the lack of food, the lack of anywhere to go. What we don't discuss is the gross proliferation of illegal firearms that are readily available to 12, 13, 14-year-olds who don't have the mental capacity. They're mentally developing. I mean, and so you can't expect someone of that age to make strong decision making as violence goes. So there's a lot of drivers. I don't think it's any one thing, but I think to the extent that we can reopen the city and reopen the availability of resources, but also get people like, for the last year, it seems like a good section of our society has just sat behind a keyboard and been pissed off at everybody else, quite frankly. And there's a meanness that's come out. And I think that we need to get back to a fundamental decency of caring for one another and making an effort for things to improve. So I'm hoping as people have something to do other than look down at their keyboard, that maybe we can get there.
Really, thank you, Chief. What a great point, because, I marvel at this thing because, like, don't you want your city to succeed? Don't you want to find solutions and be proactive in helping this? We also have Sarah DeVasher Wisdom, who is the president and CEO at Greater Louisville Inc., GLI, as many of you know it. Downtown business is integral to this thing. We need our businesses to support our restaurants, to support our banks. What's your take, and where are we on getting our workforce back downtown?
Well, I echo the sentiments of every other panelist. Thanks for pulling this event together and for having me this evening. I think this is a great discussion so far. So your first question was I surprised by the survey results, and am I comfortable going downtown? I'm very comfortable being downtown. I'm not surprised by the survey results for the very reason that you mentioned at the top of the hour, Andy. For people who are joining this, there is an interest already in downtown. Obviously, the pandemic really impacted the ability for employers to be in the office due to capacity limits and a concern about the safety of employees. With that changing, I also believe that a lot of work has been done on downtown revitalization. There were several events over the weekend downtown, and they were well attended. For what I understand, I was not there to be clear, but I did hear great things, and I saw a lot of great social media about all of the events happening. As far as downtown employers returning, I do think that is starting to happen. And we did a survey recently. It was in partnership with Louisville Tourism and Louisville Forward. And I believe that Downtown Partnership also participated in this to get a sense of when employers were returning. This was right before the announcement on the capacity restriction being lifted. So I think our data would actually be different had we done the survey even a week later. But the results indicated that employers were very much staggered between June and September. And some of the results and the conversations that we're having as the business community indicate that a lot of the employers will also continue to allow flexible options. We're not seeing a lot of people saying they're going to go entirely remote, but we are seeing people say that they may continue to allow employees to work 2 to 3 days a week from home and the other days in the office, with a focus on collaboration time, being in person for staff meetings and staff activities. So that's what we're hearing regarding return to the office.
All right, we're going to talk more about that because obviously it affects occupancy rates, and that's a big deal downtown. Last but not least, we have Ann Shadle, the co-owner of Mayan Cafe and the Mayan Street Food, restaurants among the hardest hit during this pandemic. We want to get your thoughts, first of all, how the audience responded. Are you seeing people coming back downtown? I know we had a pre-discussion and you said you've been very busy. So are you encouraged that we're starting to see more and more people in their comfort level and coming back after COVID and everything that's been going on, coming back downtown?
Yes, for sure. I mean, I think part of this important in this conversation is to define what is downtown. So we're in Nulu, which is just east of downtown, and I think that that's a different situation than the core of downtown. So between 2nd and 8th from Main down to Broadway, if that's what we're calling downtown. I think it's a different situation there for dinner businesses, dinner restaurants, and as well as lunch focused restaurants. Two different, I would say, causal factors in that. One, the lunch businesses is having such diminished quantity of people in the offices. I think that that's obviously a huge contributor to that. And then on the dinner side, I mean, and we have certainly benefited from this. It's been a lot of our growth over the years, is all of the additional attractions that have come up downtown over the last 10 plus years. So the Yum Center, the Kentucky Center for the Arts, the Actors Theater. So people coming for a reason that they could only get that activity at that particular venue downtown. I think that drew a whole other crowd of people into the downtown area. And then they would come for dinner beforehand, whether it was in Nulu or one of the restaurants closer to those venues in that core of downtown, or have a drink afterwards. So without some of those pieces having the energy in the same way that it used to, I think that the businesses that are the closest in that particular area are still struggling. I mean, I look at our situation as the exception, not the rule for the world of restaurants. We have a nearly 15-year-old brand. We have access to resources that a lot of other folks don't have, whether that's know-how to get, things like the Metro COVID Relief Grant from Rebecca and all the good folks over there. I mean, there's a pretty big gap between being a new business in this time and being an established business in this time. So I understand where we fit into that larger puzzle. I'm grateful for sure for all of the resources we've been able to access, but also understand that there are many other folks that haven't had the same experience that we have over these last 14 months.
Thank you very much, Ann. So what we would like to do now is we're going to start just asking questions. We want the panelists to feel free to jump in, ask questions of each other, follow up with anything, and then we're going to get to questions from the audience in just a few minutes. One thing that we did want to talk about, many of you all have brought it up, is that new business models for many of the big downtown businesses, that it's a hybrid. Not everybody's coming back downtown for the workforce. It's leaving a lot of unoccupied buildings Makes you wonder how many will be completely empty. So my question is, how big of a problem is it? How do you get occupancy rates back up? Who wants to tackle that question first? Anybody want to jump in?
Well, I'll start. I think that it's still unclear. I mean, until, I think until Friday, we're still at 60%, and then it goes up to 75% on Friday, and then to 100% June 11th. So folks are getting their plans together for folks to return. Anecdotally, Sarah did share that survey we've done. We're hearing that a lot of people are excited to come back. And I don't know that we know. I mean, I've seen some national statistics anywhere between 80 to 90% will return to the office. Rebecca Flyshaker says that I think that we're a lot better off when we're together as people. You can bump into each other in the hallway. I've bumped into people on my way to lunch. I call them creative collisions. You're able to talk about something. You're reminded of something else you wanted to work on. You can collaborate on something kind of on the fly. And it's just, you can't do that when you're working at home. So even if folks do some sort of remote work, I feel confident that it's going to be a balance between in office and remote.
A lot of businesses have left, and the reason to be downtown can't just be altruistic. There has to be incentives, tax breaks, parking breaks, or other ways to get businesses downtown. I'm part of the committee that's tasked with doing that, and I know there are a lot of people working very hard on that. But what kind of things can we do to incentivize businesses to locate downtown?
Anybody want to jump in on that one?
Rebecca's like, I just answered.
I know, I'm kind of chomping at the bit here.
Sarah or Ja'Cory on that one, either one of you?
Well, I do think that Rebecca should speak here a little bit, because this is about what's come up in that downtown revitalization task force, which actually relates to a task that the committee seems to believe that Louisville Forward and the city should help with. So while I would be happy to relay that, it's probably more her role to do that. So I'll defer to her. She's chomping at the bit, she said.
Well, for a different reason. I disagree that there needs to be, there should be so many incentives to bring people back downtown. If there is a reason for you to want to exist in what is an entertainment center, a community center, an employment center, and we come together. I mean, as human beings, we want to be together. So that is why downtowns all over the world are downtowns. I think there is a magnet to being part of that center. I mean, part of what is coming out of the downtown revitalization team are some incentives. And I think that's to get people either used to again, or who maybe never were interested in being downtown, to look at downtown differently. And we know that there are people like that you don't have to like downtown. You need a good, strong downtown for your community, for your city. But maybe if you were on the fence about wanting to come downtown before, this might help you now. I just don't think that I don't think that it's always going to change someone's mind if they can get free parking to actually come downtown if they didn't want to before.
Anybody have anything to add to that?
I think this points to an issue that we have with our downtown, and the fact that has been really like narrowly serving specific businesses, specific entities. And when the pandemic hit, everybody's working from home. So downtown looks a lot differently now. We're looking at a situation where we're faced with the facts of who is downtown going to really be for. And if we're only thinking about our corporate citizens, well, if we're only thinking about tourism, well, what happens when the pandemic hits and now all of a sudden those businesses really just have the crutch kicked from underneath them? Because now our local residents, because they feel like downtown is inaccessible, now you're not going downtown to support those businesses that we're talking about. And thus we see some of those businesses like Another Place Sandwich Shop close over the course of time because there has been a lack of support over the course of downtown even existing. And it's something else I'd like to touch on as far as vacancy rates go. As downtown shifts and it goes through this identity crisis and it figures out what it needs to be, we have to address the need for that pivot to happen a lot sooner and to be more proactive because of something called automation that is coming down the pipeline. And because we know that production jobs and retail jobs and food jobs and administrative jobs are going to significantly change in the next decade because of technology, because of that advancement. And I think to a certain extent, COVID-19 just moved that up. And it showed us that some of our more so-called low-skilled workers in the downtown area are not necessarily needed. So we really have to address that. Otherwise, downtown might be useless in the next 10 to 15 years because our jobs are taken up, our low-skilled jobs are taken up, our seasonal jobs are taken up. So it's important for us to be proactive about some of that coming down the pipeline.
I wanted to pick up on a couple things you said there, Ja'Cory. You brought it up and I was going to bring this point up later, but want to do it now. So I think the question is, who does downtown serve? And are we serving everybody we should? And is it inviting to everybody? Who wants to jump on that? Because I think that's one of the points that you brought up. If we're serving a narrow group and we're not looking at everybody, that's a problem with getting people to come back downtown if there's no reason for them to come downtown. So let's address that first. Is our downtown inviting to everyone? If not, what do we need to do differently in the future?
Well, that's why at the very top of like our diversity, equity, and inclusion goals, we are requiring some sort of report as far as inclusivity goes for downtown. Because, you know, right now, where can you go to really have an understanding and find out where these so-called culturally ethnic, culturally inclusive, the Black-owned business, where can you go to find where all of that is? There's really not a place where it lives. So we're asking our downtown businesses to share that information. We're asking our employers to share that information, because as we talk about improving, we're talking about increments, but you can't have increments if you don't have measurements. And we're kind of just shooting in the dark when we come up with some of these lofty goals for downtown. But if we have no clue where we are right now, we have no clue where we need to go. So as a part of our DE&I goals, we are going to ask our downtown businesses to work with the Louisville Downtown Partnership to give us access to the information we need to improve downtown, make sure we know where we are so we know where we're going and so forth.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead.
No, follow.
No,
Please.
my only other thing I was going to say, what else do we need to do? Because I've heard a lot of different things. That's going to be one of our questions later on, your top priority as we move forward. What else needs to be done that we aren't doing right now? Are we doing everything we can, do you all feel? And if we're not, what more needs to be done? Who wants to tackle that?
Such easy questions you ask.
And we're going to have it solved in the next 35 minutes.
But I do think that it brings up the bigger point. Are we doing everything we can? If we thought of everything, and I know that's very broad based, but do you feel like we are doing everything we can? I guess is my first question on that.
Yeah, and I think and I don't want to keep using downtown revitalization team as an answer, but I do think the reason that was formed was to answer a lot of these questions you're asking. And how do we look at downtown differently? How do we make it more inclusive? The fact that Councilman Arthur led this DE&I committee, I guess, to make sure that our action plan was infused across the entire spectrum of committees, to make sure that we were being welcoming and inclusive and diverse in how we are inviting to people, the events that get put on, how we treat people. And I do think that there is no one thing that's going to change downtown, because it serves so many different interests and so many different people, which is why it's exciting. I mean, there's so many things you can do if you're a visitor, if you work there, if you're a resident. So our downtown revitalization team was comprised of over 100 people who work in downtown, live in downtown, come to downtown from the suburbs to enjoy entertainment. People who don't come, by the way, to downtown, so we could get a different perspective. And those who put on out of Cleo's shop conferences and know what those meeting planners are looking for. So, you know, Chief Shields has an issue to deal with perception of crime, real crime, our housing, our houseless issue, I think, is how we are working through resilience community services and how we can treat people with compassion who are on the street, that needs a myriad of solutions as well to help. It's not just affordable housing. It's not just a shelter. And then you've got other ways to make sure that people who work here, who want to come downtown, do feel like they can come downtown. So it's a very big, large answer that I think all of us have a piece of the pie too.
Thank you.
Hey,
Let's talk about conventions and leading
Sarah
tours.
had something to say. I want
Okay.
someone else to speak to.
Sorry.
I was just going to add a few things that have come out of the downtown task force so far that I think particularly address the question that was asked. And one of the suggestions that I've seen and heard discussed a lot is a diversity career fair, so that we can hire more diverse employees in our downtown businesses, which actually helps the businesses as well. Increasing Black-owned businesses, and there are some specific ideas around that. I know 4 of our companies in our Minority Business Accelerator are located downtown, so we want to help Black-owned businesses as well and minority-owned businesses altogether. And then another thing that has come out of the task force was a Black-owned businesses pop-up mall that I believe is actually already underway. So when we talk about making downtown welcoming for all, these are some specific examples that have not already been mentioned that I wanted to bring up.
Super, thank you. And that committee is doing an awful lot of work, and the results of that should be available to the public very soon. Cleo, let's talk about conventions and leading tourists back. And those are, group tourists and individual. What were the numbers before the pandemic? And is there's an obvious conflict, and the one example that everybody points to is the headline when there was a cheerleader convention in town, and there were protests outside of that. Are these two things contradictory to each other when you're trying to bring conventions to town? We have justifiable protests in downtown Louisville targeting some of those conventions.
Andy, sure. I think those types of events, whether they happen in Louisville or anywhere else, will have an impact in that moment in time when it's hitting the cycle. We certainly talk to clients during that period of time who wanted to be reassured, and I think ultimately, our meetings, we've had 59 conventions or meeting conventions and events in this community since March. About 87,000 people have been in this community since March. And so while you're going to respond to that moment in time, it's what we want to do with our clients is to reassure them of our community, reassure them of the safety of our community, and do our best to reassure them of the vibrancy of our community, which is a lot of what we're talking about tonight. A couple of the comments that have just been made, the built environment for tourism is the core is downtown. And our hotels, museums, attractions, convention center, the restaurants, they can't work from home. So we need the vibrancy of downtown more so than anyone. And so we're certainly going to be a strong advocate for that. What I can tell you about conventions is that in 2019, we had 19 million folks visiting this community. We should all be proud of that because everyone on this call, everyone in this community was a part of creating this, making this destination what it is, why people around the world want to come and visit. What I'm happy to say is, as I told you a moment ago, we've seen 59 conventions since March. Our fall is filling up quickly, and 22, while not quite where 2019 was, it is well on its way. Our attractions are 100% open. And I think if you've been watching the news, you've seen the news from the airport recently with the addition of Breeze Airways as well as Spirit Airlines. I think Chief Shields talked about folks spending too much time focused in on their computers. Well, this weekend we had live music concerts and festivals, which is what's typically been a big market for us here in Louisville. And so it's good to see that come back. We had 3,000 people attend that event down at the waterfront. And so we've got to get back to that. We're seeing our hotels continue to grow in occupancy. So tourism, we're bullish on this community, and we're going to be bullish. Our jobs are to to market the city and bring visitors to it. So we're going to continue to lean in and work with everyone on this call in this community to ensure our downtown is a vibrant place for residents as well as for visitors.
Anybody have anything to add to what Cleo just said? Chief Shields, I want to go to a couple questions to you because most of the responses I've been getting and emails have been sent to me even prior to this have a lot to do with crime. One question that somebody asked on something that you spoke of earlier, I just want you to clarify this. Chief Shields, can you speak more about the crime downtown increasing as a result of buildings being boarded up rather than the protesters themselves, as the media continues to distort and so many perceive? The downtown business owners blame the protesters, but you acknowledge that the protesters are not themselves the danger. Can you respond to that? And then we'll have a couple follow-ups for you.
So, yeah, thanks for letting me clarify. First off, the downtown space has historically amongst the lowest crime in the city, lowest reported crime. And prior to last summer, it almost had no incidents of reported violent crime. And for the most part, since I've been here, there hasn't been any violent crime that is notable. What I've felt has been the theme has been the perception that it's not safe, in large part due to the discomfort that people felt associated with the protests, and also with the homelessness issue and the stigma around mental illness. And it's a very visible problem, and that's not a comfortable space for many folks. So what I would say is, I don't think it's fair to attribute the protests to why the buildings are shuttered. I think COVID brought the world to a screeching halt, right? I mean, this is everywhere. This isn't just Louisville downtown. It's across America that this has been an issue. I think though, when you have buildings that are not occupied, if there's not energy, if there's not business, if there's not prosperity, those situations, regardless, those factors, regardless of where they're set, contribute to crime. So I don't think it's I don't think it's fair to just say that, well, the protest cause and effect. No, I think it was a confluence of events that really caused a gut punch for Louisville. And the sooner we can cycle out of it, the sooner that we'll at least be able to re-energize those parts of the cities that either have fallen off the grid in the last year, or those parts of the city that just quite frankly were never afforded the appropriate attention that they needed.
Let's talk
Let me jump in on crime real quick. Because a lot of people isolate physical violence and they never consider economical violence, social violence, political violence. You can easily access, LMPD has a crime map and it shows you exactly where crime has taken place. You can, what crime you want to look at, where the crime is over the span of what time. And if you look at, there's other maps I want you to check out. There's a map of poverty in Louisville, the Greater Louisville Project did a study last year, 2020, a map of poverty. It is concentrated downtown District 4. Unemployment, concentrated downtown District 4 in the West End. Extreme low income, housing instability. It is all concentrated down here. But when you look at the homicides, those are concentrated in the West End of Louisville, where all of those other disparities are. You can't get away with crime in downtown Louisville. When you walk in downtown Louisville, you are on camera. So this rumor, this misconception that downtown is somehow dangerous is just not true at all. It's also not very smart for people who are allegedly committing all of these crimes. You can't commit crimes downtown. So let's throw that out the window. But you have to align the physical violence with all of the other forms of violence that exist in our city. And some of those aren't necessarily stabbing or shooting somebody. It's starving an entire community. It's taking away the jobs from a community. It's making sure they have inadequate education. All of these are impacting something called social determinants of health, which then impact your health and unfortunately can lead to you having a lower life expectancy, whether it's from getting some sort of disease or it's being involved in violence. So I wanted to make that point because a lot of people try to separate those, and it's important that we contextualize those.
I think that's a really good point, Ja'Cory. Thank you. When we go back to the crime, just one more follow-up with you, Chief Shields. As far as a crime problem though, for the city of Louisville, I mean, I think we would all be in agreement that the numbers are not acceptable. I think we can all agree with that. So the perception is that there is a crime problem. How do we tackle that and get people feeling comfortable to going not just downtown, but other places in town without this worry about it?
Well, I think that this plays into what Councilman was just speaking to, Councilman Arthur, is that, yeah, there is a crime problem. I had 4 homicides today. Are you kidding me? Who has 4 homicides? I mean, that's insanity. And yet, you know what? Tomorrow, there won't be that in the paper. It'll be some crazy remark about, the University of Louisville assistant basketball coach. It'll be some internal affairs file that was done here 5 years ago that we want to rehash. It'll be birds not getting enough bird seed. I mean, the point of it is there has to be the discussion around, and this is what ties to what he's saying is, why are we having this violence? Why are we having this violence? And it's concentrated in areas that people, in particular white people, don't go, generally speaking. And so out of sight, out of mind. You've got to talk about it. You've got to talk about it, and you have to come together collectively and figure out how are we going to solve this? How are we going to get our hands around it? Which means providing resources to change those dynamics that put us in this place in the first place, put us in this space in the first place. So I think it's not just I think this is where we have to distinguish the perception that there is a crime problem downtown in the downtown space. I think it's just that, a perception. But is there a violent crime problem? Yes, certainly. And it's disproportionately impacting those communities that are underserved economically. And so I think what you're trying to do, if I'm maybe kind of a little bit understanding where we're going with this panel, is you're trying to figure out how do we right size the city so that we can make and appropriate further investments in the parts of the city that so desperately need it. And so in that sense, I think it's, well, let's find the energy and move forward. And then, coming from Georgia, coming to Kentucky, it's the same thing. It's you almost are required to carry a gun, and there's no responsibility associated with the gun. If you get it stolen, yay, good for you. The problem is, from where I'm sitting, when you have no checks and balances on what's required to get and retain a gun, it means that there's this huge proliferation of stolen guns on the street. That becomes my problem, and they also get in the hands of the 12-year-old. And so I think that it's also having a very candid conversation at a state level to say, can we not have some common sense gun laws? Because it's an upward hill battle from here forward otherwise. I hope that answers your question. Maybe.
Well, one quickie thing with Ja'Cory, I think I just want to make sure, until we address the root causes of many of the things Ja'Cory talked about, how do we move forward, not just downtown, but as a city in general? I think, would we all be in agreement with that? This discussion needs to pivot to a lot of the things that need to be addressed that Ja'Cory talked about. Are we all in agreement with that?
Oh, I think certainly. I think that you can't keep putting a police chief at the face of it and thinking that's going to fix it. I think that's what you're trying to see with this year's budget, is the city's budget is saying, what other programs can we offer up, whether it's group violence intervention, deflection, affordable housing? What can we do to start getting at the drivers of violent crime, as opposed to just being reactionary?
Rebecca Matheny texted. She apologizes for not being able to be on the call, but she had a conflict. She often talks about the difference between homelessness and street behavior. And so I'm curious, this panel's take on that, and is there a difference between the two, and are they addressed differently?
I can jump in on this.
Yeah,
Yeah, go ahead, please.
So They are addressed differently. There is a difference, but I want to be very clear. And you might hear people say homeless, you might hear people say houseless, you might hear people say unsheltered. All of those terms are problematic. But I want to point out the fact that people just don't have control of their housing situation. They do not have long-term sustainable housing. And that is the root of the issue. When we talk about root causes, somebody asked not too long ago, well, how many people outside have mental health issues? Everybody has mental health issues, but in general. But if you live under an expressway in a tent, do you think you don't have mental health issues? Absolutely you do. It's common sense. So let's break down the numbers when we talk about houselessness in the city of Louisville. Last year, and this is from a report out for our homeless task force. Last year, there were 9,162 people who experienced homelessness. Maybe they're in housing now. Maybe they're still in a shelter. Maybe they're living outside. That's who experienced this crisis. Now, to zoom out and talk about how do we fix the need, how do we address that? We have a housing shortage. From the 2019 Housing Needs Assessment, we have a housing shortage for families at the lowest level of income. That housing shortage is based on units, 31,412 units. So when it comes to how do we fix homelessness or houselessness, whatever you want to call it, we will not fix it unless we address that housing shortage, which, thinking about the numbers here, if we're looking at units that are on the cheap side of 100,000 each, we're talking over $3 billion of investments. And that's just for the lowest level of income, 30% area median income. It's almost double when we look at other levels of income. So when we talk about addressing houselessness, we have to house people. We have to make sure they have long-term sustainable housing. That is a first. And then you provide services as needed. Unfortunately, over the course of the last almost 13 years, I think people have been playing hot potato with this issue to the extent that it has gotten significantly worse. I know, over the years, 18, 20% increases of people who are living outside. And COVID-19 has really exacerbated that. So what we need to do is not only address the long-term fix, which is housing, that $3 billion plus investment over the course of time, which I'll probably die before we address that, but we need to address it short-term. And that's exactly why I have a meeting tomorrow with some of our outreach workers who are working with our population outside. I have several proposals that are being worked on to introduce safe spaces that people can go that are outdoors. Because as you chase people around, you have case managers, some of which who don't leave their offices. You chase them around, it is significantly harder to make sure that they have access to housing to work on their housing case. And we have to make sure that we're working in a smart way. So if we help concentrate people and put them in a safe space where we can concentrate services, it will address the issue. But shuffling them around and displacing camps every other month is not it whatsoever. In fact, it makes it harder for us to assess and to manage cases. So there are short-term, midterm, and long-term solutions. It's just a matter of making sure that we work smarter and not harder.
And to the other issue of street behavior, you said there was a difference between the two. One obviously is a factor in the other, but how would we address the street behavior issue, which is, driving downtown and being approached for contributions or whatever. Is it the same? Is it the same people, and is it the same problem?
Oh, the two problems are intertwined, no doubt. There is no street behavior if you're not living on the street. It's very common sense for people to really wrap their minds around. Example, people might complain, oh, this person is urinating on the sidewalk. There are no restrooms. Oh, Preston and Jackson are dirty. There are no trash cans, or the trash cans are full and overflowing. So when we talk about this issue, we really have to talk about it in a smart way. Housing first, get people housed, and you're not dealing with the street behavior. We got businesses who call our office all the time complaining without thinking about the person who is actually living in that condition. If you address their need, it addresses your need, but more importantly, it addresses theirs. So the two are intertwined without a doubt.
Thank you.
Anybody else want to jump in on that? I don't know if anybody had anything. Let's go back to Ann Shadle. I wanted to bring you back in. Let's talk about small businesses. We've seen many leave the downtown area recently. We just had another restaurant on Main Street saying that they were closing and putting their place up for sale. What are the biggest needs of small businesses right now, Ann?
I mean, I think, again, depending which geographic area you're looking at, the first one is revenue for those businesses that haven't had the same comeback in the last couple of months as some of the other businesses. I mean, all of the federal, state, and local programs that have put financing into small businesses, I mean, that has, I would be wrong in saying that hasn't been incredibly helpful to a lot of folks. What I've seen in some other work that I do is people's ability to access that breaks down on those same economic lines. So if you have issues with financial literacy and having a CPA and good books, it makes all of that stuff that much harder to access, all that capital that's much needed. So, I mean, if I'm looking at this from a holistic perspective, the needs of small businesses now are the same as they were before. It's just probably exacerbated over these last year plus. So it's access to capital, it's access to financial literacy, it's access to decent professional services, and all of that as fast as possible.
What about finding people to work? I've seen it on fast food restaurants that, you know, we're limited hours right now. We can't find enough people to work. Are we finding that as an issue, not just in downtown, but throughout? If anyone wants to address that, and I'll let you start because obviously you're hiring, you know, and I think you said before that you're in pretty good shape. Did you say that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a thing it's across industry for sure. It is, there's a lot of it in the restaurant industry as everybody has gotten busier, or a lot of folks have gotten busier, and at the same time, the demand is higher, I think, than it's been before, while the supply is maybe lower. I have a hard time kind of justifying that. A lot of folks are like, oh, it's the unemployment. I don't know. I don't know where that one falls into things. Yeah, I mean, it certainly is across industry, that's certainly another contributing factor. The thing I keep saying is, I think customers need to have an understanding that when they go into a business, it's not going to be exactly the same as it was before. Like, we can't just turn from one day to the next and become what we were in 2019, but whether that's a hotel, whether that's a convention and the amenities that are offered during that, whether it's a restaurant service, you know, it's just, we just can't do it. And so everybody needs to have a little more patience and a little more grace for what are going to be other unexpected consequences of this entire situation.
The discussion you often hear is about, oh, how do we get back to where we were? How do we get back to where we were? Well, the committee is focused on getting it back to better than where we were. So Rebecca, like, realistically, how long is that going to take? This is a huge undertaking. We're not the only city in America dealing with this. So how long to get back to where we are and then to build it back better?
Well, I think it needs to be one and the same effort. I don't think that we're expecting to get back to where we were and then make it different, that making it or better. I think that making it better is part of what we're bringing back. Again, the conversations that we've had, the intentional focus on improving racial equity in programs in the private sector, definitely in the metro budget. We are working on several programs around helping minority business owners, to Ann's point. You know, cash is one thing, but also with technical assistance. GLI has a minority business accelerator. We are actually about to award a minority business incubator, a little different. And I think that, I mean, I don't want to put a timeline on it because I want us always to be striving for better. I mean, if we use compassion, if we're talking about how can we get our arms around everybody to make people feel inclusive, there's things that we're going to be doing a year from now that we haven't thought of yet. I think the point of this downtown revitalization team was to make sure that as soon as people could be together, which is June 11th now, we didn't know that, is that downtown looks good, feels good, and is welcoming. And I think that this is going to be an iterative process. Hopefully that private companies will feel compelled to sponsor events or do some things on their own for their own employees. Metro definitely will be. a big player working with Louisville Downtown Partnership. But I think that if people come downtown now, they will be pleasantly surprised with what they've seen on the news since last year. And I do think that it will take all of us to continually be thinking about how we can think of the people who need help or compassion, and how do we work with everybody in our community.
And to piggyback on that, Sarah, I had read an article recently and you talked about bold reforms. Can you give me like one example that what you would be talking about with bold reforms, bringing downtown back better than it was and reimagining? Give me one example of what you might consider a bold reform that we should do.
Oh, I didn't know I was going to have to limit it to one, so I'm just
Okay.
going to.
Well, you can go more than one. I was just, yeah,
a couple
please
in.
do.
I think you're talking about an op-ed that I did toward the end of the legislative session. And it was focused a lot on what needs to be done to not just make downtown more welcoming, but make our community more accountable. Sentencing reform is one example of that, which is a big workforce issue. Criminal justice reform on a larger scale than what's been done before. That's something we've been very involved in. And it was one of the things I mentioned in that article. The biggest thing that I believe is a miss from the last legislative session that we have to work on going forward, and I believe that this does impact downtown for a lot of the reasons that we've already discussed, is giving the Office of the Inspector General subpoena power so that the Civilian Review Board that was established locally can have full investigative authority. We don't tend to think of that as being a downtown issue, but it really is, because we know that we have challenges in this area. And we ran into some obstacles last session. We were told that non-elected people shouldn't have such authority, but yet we have the Public Service Commission in Frankfurt, which is a non-elected body that has that authority. We've had egregious abuses in our community with LMPD, and I mean, no disrespect to our newly appointed chief here, but we have. And we need to ask legislators as a community to give our citizens the oversight that is really needed to serve as a check on law enforcement. So I would consider that to be a very bold reform that we all need to work together to accomplish.
Let me have Chief Shields react to that, if you don't mind, Chief.
Well, it's kind of took a left turn there. I think, I'm a huge proponent of review boards, and I think that you cannot be a major city and not expect to have one. So I fully support them. What I will tell you is my experience with them has been in Atlanta. We had one arise similar to here. It was after a critical incident. And what happens is people go in with it full of emotion, and sometimes if it becomes highly adversarial at the front end, it's as ineffective as if it didn't exist. And much of the success of it will be contingent upon the inspector general that is hired and their capabilities to work collectively and to bridge different communities, so to speak. And that's not to say they have to be pro-police or pro anything, but if it's highly adversarial, and the only way, my experience is if it's highly adversarial and the only way you're getting people to the table is through a subpoena, it tends not to be quite as effective as you would hope it would be. And so I sincerely hope that they hire someone who has a high level of professionalism and proficiency in the criminal justice system, whether it's from a federal judge, a former federal judge, or U.S. attorney, or someone who really brings some heavy qualifications to the table so that it can be purposeful.
Anybody else want to jump in on that?
Cleo, I've got one for you. How much of how many of these problems can be, solved or at least addressed by getting events back, by simply having more people on the street, by critical mass in downtown Louisville? And if we can get there sooner, are we even at a place of healing where that's enough?
Well, I certainly don't want to diminish some of the comments that are made, because I think they're accurate. And so I don't believe because we have folks that come back downtown or we have visitors in town that shields the problems underneath for our city. So I think these things that we're discussing are things that need to be addressed. But certainly, I think the demise of downtown centers around the fact that there hasn't been anyone here. So it's just been premature. And I think before we can begin to assess what downtown is or isn't from a vibrancy perspective, we need to get our employers back downtown. And as Rebecca said, whether it's 80% or 90% or 70%, what a difference that would make to have those folks back downtown. Our events, our visitors are going to come. We have, as I told you all earlier, despite some of the challenges we've had that we discussed on this call, we have an attractive city. People want to visit. They want to enjoy themselves here, and that hasn't changed. So the visitors, the meetings and conventions will be here, but it's incumbent on all of us on this call to ensure it's a vibrant city, it's a safe city, it's a welcoming city, and it's inclusive not only for our visitors, but for our residents.
So we're going to open up to questions because we've got a whole lot of them from the audience. Before we do that, I'm curious about what each of our panelists thinks is the priority in moving forward. We'd love it if it could just be a one-word answer or a short sentence. So we'll just kind of round robin to everybody. What you think, if you had to name one thing, the priority moving forward with downtown Louisville. Ja'Cory, let's start with you.
Legislation.
All right, Cleo?
Together, bringing people together in this community.
Rebecca?
I'm going to say compassion.
Okay.
All right. Chief Shields?
Awareness of others.
All right. Sarah?
Collaboration on these issues.
And Ann, you get to close this portion out.
Too much pressure. Equity.
Equity.
Yeah, that's really interesting, all those words: legislation, compassion, awareness, collaboration, equity, and there were others in there. Ja'Cory, tell me what piece of legislation, the top of your list would be what?
I have something I'm drafting called the Historically Black Neighborhoods Ordinance. And what it does is it helps stabilize housing for people, people who are in neighborhoods where freedmen, Black people who were enslaved, settled during or after the Civil War. We identify these neighborhoods, we label them as historically Black. And then anytime that development is taking place in those neighborhoods, they have to go through an assessment, a displacement assessment. And if it is estimated that it is going to displace, it is going to send people out of their housing or destabilize their housing, then Louisville Metro government will not be permitted to be involved, whether it's using our resources such as our money, our land, or our employees. That would be prohibited from that development. So I'm trying to stabilize housing. And it's important as we talk about everything that everyone said, which was so beautiful and so wonderful, we have to add a sense of permanency. And, you know, it might be working for a limited amount of time, but what is the long-term save button that is going to make sure everything that we're discussing today is locked in stone? And that's why I said legislation. It is going to take political action for us to make downtown what it needs to be, because it took, you know, political action for downtown to be desegregated, which happened. The General Assembly desegregated downtown in 1966. You know, we're talking about a little bit over half a century, almost 55 years of desegregation. But when you zoom all the way out, you know, downtown Louisville is 2.5 centuries old. You know, so this fraction of the larger life of Louisville is important to contextualize, because as we talk about this work sustaining, it is going to take legislation to sustain it, and it is going to take significantly longer to heal than it took to inflict the wound.
All right, Ja'Cory, thank you so much. All right, we're going to go to some questions now from our audience. Andy, you've got some?
Sure. And these are questions from people in the audience. Why work for sub-minimum wage in the service industry if there's a better way to survive? A living wage would motivate potential employees. There's not really a question here. Again, these are coming from the audience, but it's obviously getting to the issue of pay inequity.
Anybody want to deal with that?
We need to audit our businesses, and I think downtown could be the laboratory for that to happen. Louisville Forward released a study, I guess it was last year, showing that Black Louisvillians are out-earned in every single field. And that's just one example of the inequities. So we need to audit our businesses somehow, some way. And once we understand the problem, then we could talk about the solution. But that's very important as we move forward, really figuring out how is how and what's what, so we can get to where we need to go.
Anybody have any comments about an audit or how Louisville fits in with the rest of the country in the picture when it comes to pay?
I'll jump in on that briefly. I think that there is some of those conversations happening, and I think that that's part of why has been a hesitation for folks to get back into some of these lower paying service industry jobs. So the conversations that I'm having with lots of restaurant owners is pay more, period, figure it out. Like, and I'm saying that to myself as a business owner and to other folks. So there's more of a shift in that in these last 2 months in conversation than the last 15 years that I've been doing this. So that I think there is some movement in that.
Do you think in part that was because of the pandemic? I mean, was there, when all of that happened, a reevaluation with people, you know, after their safety? I mean, I think everybody's kind of reevaluated, what am I going to do now? And it seems that there has been a shift in how people think. A lot of people are changing jobs. They're thinking about, what job did I have? I mean, have you all seen a shift just in the psyche of people coming back after the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is excellent that while painful, where the business owners are in this moment in time where we're saying we have to change what we do to attract employees. It's putting the pressure on us to say, I need to think of benefits differently. I need to think of pay differently. I need to think of schedule and hours differently. And if we don't do it, we're not going to get people. We're not going to be able to open back up and bring the revenue back in the way that it used to be. Most businesses I talk to can't even go back to the 75 or 100% capacity that we're being offered because we don't have enough staff for it. So there is something that's happening quickly that is changing the mindset of how people approach the whole process of HR.
There's a couple of
Have you all seen it? Yeah, go ahead. I wondered if we'd seen it in any other industries. Go ahead, Rebecca.
I was just going to say there's a couple of comments in the chat that really back up what Ann just said. Raise minimum wage, a living wage would motivate employees. And I do think, from where we sit, where we're working with small businesses, I mean, we're hearing exactly what Ann's saying. And we're also sitting where I sit. We have efforts to reskill and upskill employees who might be looking for a different career path for different, better wealth building opportunities for themselves and their families through tech, especially. And we did focus on hospitality workers when they were out of work during the pandemic. And I sure hope that we didn't create our own problem, but I mean, there is, it's kind of circular, you know, the pay is where it starts.
We also have to acknowledge how childcare and the lack of childcare plays into this. Right now, there's a major hesitance with people to put their children back into daycares, even though daycares are starting to reopen because the vaccine has not been approved for children under 12. So that's a serious consideration as well. There are also capacity restrictions with daycare. There are challenges to school. We may also see this staffing shortage grow worse in June because we know that there will be a child care subsidy added onto the extra UI benefit. So in terms of whether or not we see this in other industries, I would say that we see it most of all in our hospitality industry. That's based on the data that we have at our organization.
Also want to point out, just to put everyone on the same page, Louisville, and somebody who's been here longer in government, correct me if I'm wrong, Louisville attempted to raise minimum wage, and Kentucky Supreme Court said no, you can't do that in 2016, I believe. So anyone who's fighting for minimum wage, like, it's great to have the conversation here, but you got to take that smoke to your state representatives, to your state senators. You got to push them and tell them to push their colleagues, because we don't have the authority to do that here locally.
Ja'Cory, we got a question from one of the viewers asking you to speak to the idea of rapid rehousing, as in Seattle.
If they're referring to what I think they're referring to, when we think about housing or rehousing, I think it's like 20 to 30 days is best case scenario in terms of getting someone housed immediately when they experience houselessness, when they lose their home, when they're evicted, whatever the case is. Tamika Laird, the Director Tamika Laird from the Office of Resilience and Community Services, the last time we talked, she might have said we were looking at closer to like 120 days if they get housed at all, in terms of the average of what it takes. And that sounds great in theory. If we're talking about the same thing, that sounds great in theory. But going back to what I said earlier, we have a housing shortage of 31,412 units. So I know there's hundreds of people right now who got vouchers walking around, outside or living in shelters, and there's nowhere for them to go. So when we talk about housing where? And that's why we're talking about these short-term solutions, just to stabilize where people are so that we can do the case management load. But it's going to take like public advocacy to change those outcomes. Have you already commented on the city budget form? Are you showing up to speak Thursday to our public hearing? Have you told your council member how you expect them to allocate housing resources from this federal money? And if you haven't, making comments here is the least of your concerns. You should be making those comments to your elected representatives, because I'm talking that talk, but it's the person who represents you talking the same language.
I've got a question for Cleo. Louisville is made up of unique neighborhoods with their own history and heritage. How can we show locals and visitors downtown is also a unique neighborhood with a history, not just a hub of businesses and events?
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's an important statement. I think, downtown needs to be built more like a neighborhood. I think it's been built to be a place where people come to work, where people come to visit, stay in a hotel, have a convention, and it needs to be more of a neighborhood. We saw prior to the pandemic, many of our visitors that would be here for a meeting or convention or coming in for a leisure visit, they would get out to our neighborhoods because they wanted to experience more of an authentic feel. So I think those things I think it's very important that we begin to look at downtown a bit differently, as we've talked about on this call, about what do we want our new normal to be. I think downtown and many of your successful cities, their downtowns are more neighborhoods than they are just a core for business.
Chief, I'm interested in your take on this one. The question is, and the question is to the larger group, have homeless shelters been invited to the conversation about revitalization of downtown? The follow-up is Salvation Army and Wayside Mission have a huge responsibility in regard to crime downtown. Chief, is that true? Is there data that says that the homeless population has a big impact on crime?
Oh, I don't think that's a fair correlation. I would not be comfortable just dropping anything on a group such as that broadly. I think that the perception is a huge part of the problem. Our largest driver of crime in downtown, and of course maybe at the beginning I should have qualified this. When I think downtown, I'm assuming we're talking the downtown, the business district. I realize that the people in the suburbs may view it as all of Louisville. I don't know. I'm talking the downtown space, and that in the downtown space, the number one crime that's historically been the case is stealing cars. And I don't think you can really tie that on too many of the homeless people, quite frankly. So I think it's safe to say that it's broader than that.
Thank you. I wanted to clarify that before we went any further with it. So let's take the other part of that question to you, Rebecca. How much have the shelters been a part of the conversation about downtown revitalization and what we can do to find housing for those folks and solve this problem?
Yeah, we sent out invitations to several people. I know Coalition for the Homeless and a couple of other groups. I don't think we sent them to the shelters themselves, but this is part of the conversation. I mean, we did have to draw a line at some point, since this group could come up with solutions for homeless, but it's because it's the city that's dealing with it, that isn't a large part of the action plan. So it's, yes, we heard, we listen, we are working with Councilman Arthur and our Office of Resilience and Community Services, as well as the service providers and shelters, but also hoping for funding that comes through Louisville Metro and the federal funding that will help with that. So it's recognized in this plan. It is not a key part of it.
Another question I have, the CJ has a list of businesses that are considering equity as they plan their future. What expectation can we have of all businesses to improve circumstances of all Louisville residents? I mean, a lot of this talk and a lot of the words that you all described us to be able to move forward together would be collaboration, compassion, equitable, all those kinds of things. So what is the expectation on businesses to move forward with that top of mind? Anybody?
I think to a certain extent, I mentioned segregation earlier. To a certain extent, there was this big fight over the course of the life of Louisville for people to be given access to something. Given access to something. Then there was this fight about treatment, hire me right, treat me right. But I think at this point in time, like those conversations are dead and way beyond, they're expired. If you're talking about treating people unfairly, unjustly, just by treating nothing economical at all, that ship sailed in the 60s. At this point, the only thing that we need to be talking about when we talk about equity is paying me right. And when we talk about jobs downtown, we have to make sure there's depth. It's not just a matter of hiring people, because a significant portion of those jobs are seasonal, as we know when we talk about tourism, but also in the hiring, are we hiring people into leadership? Are we hiring people in, and we talked about livable wages? Are we hiring people in higher wage salaries? We have to really have the conversation around pay equity, and that's incredibly important to have. So when it comes to what do we do for our businesses in terms of expectations and equity, hire me right, treat me right, and pay me right. And right means that I can afford to just work at your business or work at your spot and pay all my bills and take care of my family without another job on the side or anything else that I might have to do to resort to pay for my bills.
I guess
Go
it was
ahead.
about a month ago, GLI also released a racial equity pledge that focused on 7 major components, including things like transparency, hiring talent, vendor spend, making sure that businesses have equitable vendor spend. We have had almost 200 businesses sign that. And then hopefully later this week, we're going to be issuing a toolkit that will help the businesses that have signed live out the elements of the pledge. So we are seeing a lot of businesses make these commitments. And I believe that a lot of businesses truly want to. It's not about an expectation or something that's forced. There is really a willingness to step up to the plate and do what's necessary.
I'm curious how many people on this call, your organizations are into DEI efforts now that you were not, or new DEI efforts now that you were not in 2 years ago. And we are here at the Fraser. So has everybody taken on new DEI efforts at their business and continue to grow through that?
At GLI, we announced our initiatives in January 2020. So yes, ours is new. It was not in existence 2 years ago.
Same thing in Louisville tourism. We've taken it on for we did a DEI audit of our own organization. We've provided training to our industry. We've created a Black Tourism Advisory Council to ensure that minority businesses in this community can be connected to tourism, to ensure that we're creating product development around tourism that reflects on the heritage of this community, all the heritage of this community. So absolutely.
One question that kind of came in just now regarding the survey results that we did. What do panelists think it will take to change the minds of those who indicated they're unwilling to return downtown? If you've been on social media, even when we put up that we were having this panel discussion just on this topic, elicited a lot of remarks, not all of them, good, however you term good, but a lot of people just are hell-bent on the perception that I'm not coming back downtown. I don't know if you all have seen some of those. I have. So what would you say to them? So somebody who might be like that, who's unwilling, what do you do to change their mind to get them back downtown? Let's round robin that. I'd like each of you to weigh in on that. Sarah, I'll start with you.
The truth is, I don't really talk to many people who are absolutely, completely against coming back downtown. I talk to people who find Zoom to be very efficient and find remote work to be efficient, but I don't really encounter a lot of people who are saying, I am simply resistant to ever walking the streets of downtown again. So I don't know how you change that mindset, except to continue thinking about how we revitalize downtown and focus on having events like this weekend and focus on re-envisioning space downtown. We don't know what leases will be available. I mean, as you look over the past year, we simply don't know the total impact because even companies that are slowly coming back or not planning to come back in full will still have leases for a while unless they just happen to expire. We have to be thinking about how we incentivize residential, how we encourage businesses and really create those neighborhoods. So I'll stop there and hopefully others have more insight on how to completely change a mindset, because I just don't talk to people who think I'm not coming back at all.
That mindset. All right, Rebecca?
Well, I think everyone's heard that you have to tell somebody something 7 times for it to sink in and click in. And I think that's the marketing communications necessity for all of us. And that's it was its own committee as part of our task force. And I do think that however we can continue to share that message that gets somebody to start even thinking about coming downtown, and if they're able to have a positive experience. And so I do think it's the shows. I think it's a baseball game, a basketball game. I mean, I don't know what, turns people on. I love concerts and baseball and drinking beer when I do it. And I can do all of that downtown. And I think that is something that we just need to keep talking about.
Steve Shields? Are you a baseball fan? Because you were laughing at that answer.
Oh, I'm imagining Rebecca teetering and tottering at the University of Louisville Stadium. But I'm glad it's just here. You know what? My obligation is to just keep hitting at crime and getting the crime down. I mean, I know at the end of the day that whether it's real or perception, in anyone's mind, my obligation is to address crime and to get crime down. And we're just going to keep working hard at it. And what I have found, and yes, I understand it's easy there's been some really high profile, unpleasant events associated with LMPD, but what I will tell you is the body as a whole is incredibly strong and incredibly committed to this city. And I think that you need to take some comfort and pride in that there's a huge amount of men and women on this department who really want the community to respect them. And they go out every day trying to attain that. So we're just going to keep hitting away at it.
Cleo, you and I have talked about this. Isn't there a small portion of folks who've never come downtown? And if they're not interested in coming downtown, should our focus be in changing their minds, or should we focus on the other 97% of people who are willing?
I think in the visitor industry, we certainly want residents and visitors to visit our attractions, our hotels. But certainly, as I shared with Andy, there are people who said, I haven't been downtown in 5 years. Doesn't mean they're not going to come downtown. But I also don't think that that's the person we should be focused in on. I think, as Rebecca said, we need to be focused in on creating a vibrant downtown, whether it's concerts, whether it's festivals. We've got, our performing arts are downtown. I think there's enough here for folks to want to come downtown. And if you just don't have an interest in coming downtown, then I'm not sure you'd have an interest in visiting any downtown in this country. I don't think it has anything to do with Louisville. So.
All right, one audience person is saying, why aren't we surveying, asking the people finding out who say they aren't coming back downtown? I've seen several reasons given on social media. So we won't get into the litany of that, but I think that's a good point. Our survey is done to ask people specifically why. So Ja'Cory, let's go to you on that. What would you say to people to try to get them back downtown, or would you?
gonna translate what Brother Cleo Battle just said. Not my fault, not my problem. We have to deal with reality. And the reality is, I think Dr. King said it best, talking about changing the heart versus taming the heart less or restraining the heart less. As a legislator, I write laws. That is my top priority and responsibility to make this city better. So it's not true that you can change people's hearts with these laws, with the legislation that I write, but you can tame the people who are heartless. So, I care a lot less about the people who don't deal in reality. We're talking about perception here. And I made it very clear earlier, you can see where the crime occurs in this city. And if you're not willing to look at where that crime occurs and acknowledge and accept the fact that it's not happening downtown, well, that's just a conversation that you're just going to have to keep having with yourself, because we don't have time to deal with it. When we talk about the hundreds of people who are living in the streets and the thousands of people at large who are living on people's couches and in shelters, that's where our priority should be. When we talk about the small businesses that might be struggling to remain downtown or elsewhere, that's where our priority should be. We should be making sure that we're taking care of the people who are barely surviving in this city. And when it comes to the people who won't even acknowledge the truth and the fact that downtown is not dangerous, downtown is not dealing with the influx of crime whatsoever, it's almost like it's unserious. And if you know me, I'm serious, and I ain't got time for anything that's unserious. So again, you can see where the crime is very clearly. Our city has a crime app, and if that doesn't change your mind, next.
All right, Ann?
Follow that up.
If I can speak honestly, I answered to myself as a small business owner, and I answered to my customers. And I've known for the whole time that I've done this that we can't please everybody. This past year, we've made some statements that put a line in the sand that said, before I said, I'll take anybody's money. And now I say, this is what we believe. And if you don't like that, if you don't want to come here and spend your money with us, okay, we're fine with that. So I say I wouldn't even try to focus on that. Focus on the people on the fence. There may be some ability to make a difference there, but otherwise, move on.
I didn't know before we start wrapping up, and we can't thank you all enough, all our panelists. We know you all are so busy and have so many obligations, so we really thank you, and our audience as well. Do any of our panelists have questions of each other? Sometimes you might not always be on the same calls. I didn't know if there's anybody on this panel who has a question for one of the other panelists. No, going once, going twice. All right.
Go on. I've heard there's one last question I want to get to quickly, and then we'll wrap it up because I want to honor all the questions from the guests that have joined us tonight. I've heard this concept. I don't know that I've heard it here in Louisville, but the question is about empty buildings, empty office space that could be renovated for low income housing.
Let's do it. What's the question?
Problem solved.
Are there any? Is there any work in the works along these lines?
It's
So-
definitely, oh, go ahead, Councilman.
Go ahead, do your thing.
I was just going to say, we've heard it. We definitely have heard it. It's come up. I mean, it is a matter of who owns the building, what they want that to be. If it's already an office tower, I think there's something with leaseholds and finance, how they finance it, that is a different question, that a beast that I don't think this body could climb. But I do think that there is we are very lucky. We have a lot of cool architectural buildings that could be transformed into housing units. And I hope everyone's not looking at the city to fund it, but I do think that we would want to help where we can.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, going back to what I said earlier about reality, like some people look at buildings and they think, oh, we should turn this into that. Bro, you don't own that building. How you just gonna tell somebody what they should do with their building? Like, it's crazy. So that, in some cases, it costs more to actually renovate a building than it does to just create a new one. I know JCPS struggles with this sometimes when it comes to, building new schools versus renovating schools. So it's just a matter of what kind of building it is. But absolutely, I can't say this number enough. I think this is my third time, 31,412 units. And that's just for the lowest level of income. It almost doubles when we look at other levels. We need housing.
Profound numbers. They
Yeah.
really are, Ja'Cory. Anybody have any final points to make? And then we're going to wrap it up on our panel.
All right.
All right, thank you all.
Thank you. Obviously, there's a lot of great will. There's a lot of great ideas, a lot of good intention. So we very much appreciate you being with us. As we start to wrap up tonight's conversation, it's obvious that the path to recovery is not easy and it's not fast. It's going to require us all to look within a little bit. We don't want to get back to normal. We want to build it back better.
And I'm trying to remember those words again. I love that. I think that was my turning point for me tonight, just listening to those one-word things about the priorities moving forward, because you all seem to be very much on the same page when it came to that. We want to thank all of our panelists for their time tonight. We know they're very busy and have a lot going on. We hope this program, our Bridging the Divide programs, can help move the needle in some small way. To our website for more information. And thanks to our audience for turning out tonight and also asking a lot of really good questions tonight.
Don't quit on your hometown, folks. Time to double down on Louisville and learn from the hard lessons of 2020. Listen, learn, and let's rebuild this thing together. So thank you all for joining us, both in the audience and on our panel. Thanks so much.
Thank you all so much. Appreciate it.